Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Wilds on Film. Today, I am joined by the lovely Geeketiquette.
Hi.
So, I want to thank you for joining me, and I believe this all started when you were telling me about your love of vampire films, right?
Yep, that's correct, yeah.
And this worked out because I have been looking for someone to have a very serious discussion about the Blade movies. The three films based off of the Marvel Comics that probably most predominantly known for, their role in I believe it began in 1998, and then, starring Wesley Snipes. Probably what was one of the premier vampire movies around that time that really kind of approached it for a pretty dark, gritty, and very violent style. Is this kind of how you see those films?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I'm trying to think what else was around at that point. I mean, you had Interview with the Vampire and, based off of, like, Anne Rice novels and the Vampire Chronicles. And then Blade, there wasn't really that many superhero comic, to film adaptations that were around at that point. And it was a lot of sort of sci-fi stuff that was coming out. And so Blade was, as you say, it was very dark and gritty, and especially for Marvel as well. And it was probably one of the sort of the first or the stepping stone for comic book to film adaptations, I think. So it was definitely something that was new and fresh for the time.
You're right. It did seem to be kind of an odd pick for Marvel to go with something a little bit darker, a little bit smaller, not, one of their big franchises. But that's interesting. Now, if I remember correctly, you don't read much of the comics, so you didn't know much about Blade before seeing these films, right?
No, I didn't have a clue. I mean, I'm still quite a comic noob, I guess. I don't really read much in general, so seeing the sort of the Marvel intro, I was like, oh, really? I didn't realise that. So it was kind of like news to me at the time. But yeah, I wasn't aware that he was a character from Marvel Universe at all.
Right. What was your first experience with Blade? Did you see the first film in the theaters? Did you watch it on DVD later? Did you want to go see it? Was it a friend who convinced you to go see it? How did you first meet this character?
I think it was actually via the soundtrack first. A friend of mine had the soundtrack, and then we just watched it. I think it must have been on. I don't think it was on DVD. It must have been VHS, I think. A lot of my friends that I used to hang around with, and we just sort of watched it, and it was so they were very into martial arts as well, and it is quite because Wesley Snipes is into his martial arts.
Oh yes.
And I think it was Demolition Man. He also does a bit of karate.
He does. He does a fair bit in there.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it was sort of based on that kind of thing. And they were also, like me, into vampire films, and so it just kind of made sense really to watch it. And yeah, that was probably when I was introduced to it by the soundtrack rather than the film first.
Now, that's interesting because most of the people I talk to, and myself included, will say that all three films have good soundtracks.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say I wasn't as keen on the second, or I didn't even bother with the third soundtrack. So I think the third one was more hip-hop style, like hip-hop and R&B, rather than the sort of underground techno kind of thing, which I suppose all three... for the time that they were released, it was the right kind of genre and the feel, but and they sort of went with the times. But the first album, first soundtrack was my favourite, still is as well. So,
and it has kind of an iconic, not only a song that's associated with this scene, which is, of course, the what everyone refers to as the rave scene or the bloodbath scene, the techno music that's playing over. You hear that, you used to hear it everywhere, and even now, you still hear it a good bit.
Yeah, you do. It's actually in Gary's mod as a taunt.
Really?
It does play occasionally. So even now, in gaming, it's used as a funny taunt. But yeah, that is probably the most known and iconic, which is actually not my favourite. I mean, it's bloody good. Don't get me wrong, bloody. But there's actually one track that isn't on the album, on the soundtrack. That's later on when they go and see Pearl, and Pearl's the sort of the records keeper. The extremely large vampire and
very high-pitched, whiny voice.
Yes, yeah, exactly. It just doesn't move, and can't. And it's I can't think of the name of it, but it's Japanese, two Japanese girls, and that's not on the album at all. But
Correct.
That's actually one of my favourites.
Yeah.
So.
And you're not the only one. I've heard other people say that, and I've heard that particular song used in more like fan projects and stuff like that. So it struck a chord with a lot of people. And that's interesting because I think the music, at least for the first two films, really helps to set the tone for the characters in a lot of ways.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. And it was, again, that, and going back to that song, it was... Again, for the time, it reminded me a lot like Bjork's Army of Me. It had that kind of, that grungy, gritty, I don't know how to describe it, that noise, it just gave me that kind of feeling. I don't know why.
It was almost a new wave industrial kind of static. It wasn't quite what you would classify as normal industrial music, but it had that feel to it. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, definitely.
Right. Agreed. Well, let's actually jump into a couple things about the film here for a second. So the first Blade, of course, was released in 1998, and its director was Stephen Norrington. Now, I didn't know much about Stephen Norrington, and really the only thing on his resume that stands out to me is something that the majority of people might know was the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie, which I'm not sure how you feel about that, but I don't see as a shining mark on anyone's record.
No, it's for me, it's a guilty pleasure. I actually quite enjoyed it.
Really?
And I've watched it, a fair few times. And now that you mention that, because I wasn't actually aware of that, but now that you mention it, you can kind of see visual similarities to them.
Definitely.
But yeah, it is a guilty pleasure of mine, so I do quite like it.
That's interesting. We'll have to talk about that another time. But the writer for this film is David S. Goyer, and the reason his name may sound familiar to a lot of people is he wrote the Batman trilogy with Christian Bale. So he wrote Batman Begins, Dark Knight, and of course The Dark Knight Rises. He has also written a lot of other DC Comics films because he has a good reputation with Warner Brothers. So he wrote Man of Steel. And he's been on a ton of other projects if you go look him up. What's interesting is that Goyer has written all three of the Blade films that we will be discussing today, and he was actually the director of the third one. But we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute.
Okay.
So
yeah, I wasn't aware of that, actually.
Right. So the interesting tidbit that I didn't know until doing a little bit more research and actually digging into Norrington is he actually turned down Blade 2. The studio was very pleased with the first Blade movie, thinking, of course, this was a new big franchise for them and everything. And so they really wanted him for Blade 2, but he turned it down. And so looking at his career now, I kind of wonder if he regrets maybe turning down doing the second Blade.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, if I was him, then I probably would as well, because I think he did a pretty darn good job. As I say, Blade 1 was, a stepping stone, I thought, and, it was going in the right direction, and it was nice to see, a Marvel film that was, that was completely, because I normally see Marvel films, especially now, as the kind of, kiddie type of moral, like, oh, let's be friends, and oh, we're going to have a fight, and oh, that kind of stuff. Whereas DC is always very dark, and I keep using the word gritty, but I don't know what other way to describe it. But the two contrasts, and
Blade is a very dirty film. It is an incredibly dirty film for the way that they wanted to present the environments, the characters. And so gritty is a good word for it, but also I just think sometimes comic book movies feel too clean. Everything's just too spotless and clean.
Right, exactly. There's no blood, there's no, and in this, you know, given obviously what it's about and that sort of thing, there's obviously plenty of it, which, you know, it's refreshing to see. So I think, yeah, he's probably kicking himself now, thinking I probably should have, you know, contributed to that one at the very least. But
might have gotten some more recognition at least.
yeah, exactly. You know, if you've only got like two sort of films that you're mostly known for, and yeah, so.
Right. Now, let me explain before we go any further.
Mm-hmm.
I would, and I have recently ranked pretty much all of the comic book films, not just Marvel, not just DC, but all of the comic book adaptation films that we've gotten, especially the bigger ones. And for me, Blade still ranks up there in the top 5, covering everything. So this first film is something that I really love. I adore a lot of what they do and how they present it. And I want to talk about the opening scene of the movie, which is Blade's origin. It's the opening scene in the hospital.
Yeah.
It shows what happens to his mother, his birth. It gives you just enough. And it's an origin story that's done simple, quick, and correctly. And the reason that I think that's important is because a lot of movies, unfortunately, spend so much time on the origin story that that's what the film really becomes about, and it takes away from it. A good example, I think, is, even though I love it, is Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man movie. And the problem is when you have characters like that, they keep retelling the origin story. Like, how many times have we seen Batman become Batman, so to speak?
Right. Yeah.
So I'm curious what your thoughts are of how this opening scene, like, not knowing the character. You know, I went into it knowing a decent little bit about the character, but you not knowing the character, did this establish enough for you? Did this feel like a good origin story?
I think it gave just enough to, you know, to pique my interest and think like, oh, you know, what happened, and you know what happened between then, and I want to find out more. You know, it just gives you enough of a taste of you know, what sort of upbringing he may have had. You know, did his mum survive? And I mean, you sort of left initially thinking no, she probably didn't, and you know, what sort of upbringing, as I say, he had, and whether he was taken, you know, where's the dad, and who, you know, it obviously is evident that since it's about vampires and that, because obviously I knew to a degree what it was about marginally, like the type of film, otherwise I probably wouldn't have watched it, but and it's obvious that she has been bitten, so, you know, how does that work? And as I say, you know, going by general sort of myths and things and the legends and what you know from media and from movies and books and that sort of stuff, it's a nice sort of take on how somebody could be a Damphir, you know, half human, half vampire type. So yeah, I think it was just enough, not too long, as you say. It gets to the point, and it doesn't, you know, drivel on or keep going back to it and that kind of thing.
Right. And continuing on with this idea of this introduction into the world of Blade, the next thing that we see is a car zooming by, and we have in it two people, one of which is who is a snack, and the other is Tracy Lords, who is the first vampire that we see. Now, I wonder if they use Tracy Lords here on purpose, because she has a history with not just being a porn star, but being one of the porn stars who almost took down the industry and got, there was a lot of talk about it because of her being underage and stuff like that. So you have this person who, you know, wasn't bad for the role that they got her, but had kind of more of a meaning to people who knew who she was. And so you have her bringing this person into this bloodbath scene, into this party that's in this almost abandoned looking meatpacking plant or whatever it was, you know, super secretive, in the back, hidden away. Looks like the kind of party that you know, would love, that it'd be one of those experiences that you would talk about probably for the rest of your life. But, you know, not everybody's going to be there. It's kind of exclusive. It's kind of the private, almost intimate thing, but with this huge rave. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's kind of sort of letting you into this sort of world I guess it could be a not so much a message, but it's kind of reflecting maybe her experience I don't know, it might not be the case, but yeah, it's going from being very sort of open and driving to this secret location, and it's very very gringy and very what's the word, very exclusive and unkept and pretty unhygienic, and then going into this underground kind of whole different world that nobody is aware of. Yeah. And yeah,
a world that, as you just described, the opposite of. Inside the club looks white, it's sterile, it's a meatpacking plant, so there's certain like safety protocols and regulations and stuff like that. It's very much it's a contrast. It's a contrast that I think they did extremely well. And in this scene, most people that I talk to who have only seen the movie once or twice don't realize you actually meet all of the bad guys in this first part. You see Deacon, who walks by one of the individuals. You see Quinn, who is one of my favorite characters ever. We'll get to him more in a minute. And then you see Mercury, who's the blonde vampire.
Yeah.
Who I think is an early inspiration for just crazy, sexy, cool kind of, bad girl that they were going for. But you see all of these characters, and we get these brief glimpses, and it kind of sets up everything. And so, like I said, going on with the introduction, this does what they're trying to do, I think, very well.
Yeah.
And it's right all before everything goes to complete shit. Because then we get our first look at Blade. And I love this intro. I love his first appearance, the way he shows up. There is just this kind of swagger to him. And as soon as he shows up, you know that this isn't someone new. This isn't someone that people, don't know what to expect. Someone calls him out by Daywalker.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You can feel the atmosphere in the tents, and the fact that the majority of them are, shitting themselves, basically. Right. Yes. They know exactly who he is. And he doesn't even have to, he just has to be standing there and just looking around. That's all he has to do. He doesn't even need to say a word, doesn't need to make any major movement. It's just, they're starting to cower already, like, oh, okay, this is happening,
Right. And he's such a stoic character, even in the comics and all that. But he has these little mannerisms, little things he does with his martial arts, with his movements, the way he kind of approaches and his facial expressions when he looks and talks to people. But my favorite is something that I noticed that he does throughout all three movies. This man smiles a lot. Now, he usually does it right before he's about to throw a weapon or kill someone or make some stupid one-liner.
Uh-huh.
But have you noticed that? Have you noticed the small expression stuff that he does?
Yes, I have actually, and as you say, when he's in fights, etc., and like there's one particular bit that I always remember, and it's the end fight actually between him and Frost. Now, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but it's just this one thing, and they kind of both sort of kick their feet, like they meet together. I don't know how to, like, kind of almost like a back kick, like it's on the ground and both their feet meet. I don't know how to describe it. Is that
the part where they're doing the back roundhouses at each other?
I think it is, yeah. And it's just that one bit, and then he runs off. Then he runs sort of forward, and I think Frost is about. I can't quite remember the full scene, but it's just that one bit, and like you say, his sort of little smiles and kind of almost grunty laughs that he does, just a little like kind of thing. I have noticed that he does. He's quite a jolly, not a jolly, but he enjoys what he does, and you can tell.
Yeah, I agree. So, we have this amazing setup, this beautiful intro into the world. You now know how violent this movie is going to be. You know there's going to be the martial arts segments. You know it's about vampires. We see this awesome-looking destruction sequence where these vampires break into just bone and ash and fire. In my opinion, still one of the best overall first few minute setups for any movie. And then we get into what I like to think of as kind of like the gore factor and really getting into the characters, which we have this autopsy scene with Quinn after he's been set on fire. And I don't know about you, but the way his look, the makeup they did to make him look, burned, and the camera angles, he's just straight charred. And the camera angles that they get were just perfect.
Yeah, because again, you don't need to see the full thing. You don't need to see enough, and it also obviously introduces Karen, the hematologist,
right?
And then you've got what's his name? What's her ex-boyfriend's name? The other doctor,
Curtis.
Thank you, Curtis. Yeah, and he's kind of just whatever. He's just sort of there.
Can we talk for a second about how the last line that she says to him is "It's over," and then all that shit happens to him?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like, well then, oh well, and Quinn's lying there, and actually you can see him. You can see his breathing actually when he's lying on the table while they're doing the autopsy. But that was just like a little thing that I noticed, and his makeup. That is one thing. The makeup in the whole film, and that in particular. Was and I'm pretty sure that the special effects / makeup artist worked on The Lost Boys as well, if I remember rightly.
I almost am pretty sure you're right about that. I would have to double check, but I remember hearing something about that.
Yeah.
Now, Quinn's a really good example of that because he gets burnt several times. He loses the hand, which is a reoccurring joke in the movie. So he's constantly showing off the new hand, and there's some really good makeup effects stuff, but Quinn's a good example of someone to keep an eye on if you want to see stuff like that. And we'll talk about that effect in the second movie a lot more because it plays a bigger part. I do have a question for you. How did Blade walk into that hospital armed with a sword and guns and not get stopped until he got up to that floor?
I have no clue. The only thing I can assume, because I wonder this throughout like all three films actually, how he just walks around, doesn't give a shit, and he's blatantly got you need a license for that stuff. The only thing I could assume is that he snuck in through a window or something.
Sure. I'm sure there might have been one of those things where it's like we could take the time to explain this, but it would take away from the pacing of the movie, so I will excuse it. But I remember just thinking that when I was younger. I was like, never mind. Yeah. It does lead up to one of his best and probably his first just these lines, these one-liners that Wesley Snipes somehow pulls off that I don't think many people really could make. Like maybe him, Samuel Jackson, a few other people. But it's the episode with the cops and they shoot him and he just turns to them and he says, "Motherfucker, are you out of your damn mind?" Yeah.
It is brilliant, and I couldn't. I like you say, apart from maybe Sam Jackson, that Snipes is the only one that could pull it off, and again, it just shows his sort of funny. He's like, dude, what are you doing? It just shows that kind of side of him that you, from when you're first introduced, you think this absolute badass that wouldn't really. That's kind of in the shadows and stuff. And then he's like, what are you doing? Like, isn't it obvious I'm trying to help you here?
Right.
But, not so many words.
So the last thing that they really do in the scene, they do one really cool thing with Karen, which is showing that she reminds Blade of his mother. And this is going to come back later. And it's a good tie-in without trying to beat people over the head with what you're trying to tell and this depth you're trying to put into the story. Because a movie like this doesn't need a ton of depth for it to be entertaining. But when you add stuff like that, it adds to it. It really complements the film. Like, in my opinion, when they jump on the roof and he resets her shoulder on the roof. Yeah. Because later she helps him in a very similar way. So it's this very... small callbacks in films will really entice the people who enjoy the films.
Yeah.
It gives them something to really latch onto. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I also think the only thing with that sort of when he looks down at Karen after, Quinn's like bit her neck, the only thing that sort of confused me was I was thinking, well, hang on, how would he see that? Is that more for the audience rather than him? Because he obviously assumed that she's dead, and how could he have seen her, when he's just been born? I mean, okay, he may be half vampire, but I don't think his memory is that good. So
that's a very good question.
Yeah, so that I always thought was more for the audience, and to give you a bit of an insight that he's not this sort of solid, heartless kind of guy. He isn't just doing it for the job. There is a deep reason for it, and obviously it's tied to his mum. And again, it gives you a bit of an idea of his character and why he is doing what he's doing.
We're going to talk a little bit more as we explore the other two films too, that Blade does a really good job of, at least once in each movie, showing, like you said, that he is not heartless, that he does establish connections, he cares for people, but he knows reality. He knows the world he lives in. He knows he has to separate himself to be the person he needs to be. And that is a good segue into what I want to talk about, which is Whistler. The character of Whistler was slightly based off an original comic book character that was in the Blade comics, but they didn't want to use that character, and when they knew that they were getting Chris Christopherson, they changed the character to fit kind of him and his personality more. And one thing that I find really interesting is this character, they knew they were introducing him in the movie, so they first, to kind of test him out with audiences and get people to know who he was, they put a version of the character into the 90s Spider-Man cartoon. That was kind of his first introduction, really, into that. And I'm not sure if you saw the 1990 Spider-Man cartoon that came on Fox.
No. Along with, comics and going into that world, the cartoons, I didn't really watch too many of them. I may have caught them now and then, but not enough to sort of know, to see like cameo appearances from, because I think Blade has actually appeared in Spider-Man, or
yes, yeah, he was in a couple episodes at least. Yeah,
so I think I have seen bits of that, but other than that, that's as far as I go, really.
Right. Well, the version of the character that appeared in Spider-Man was obviously meant more for a children's cartoon, so he was toned down a lot, and that's one thing I want to talk about with Whistler. Whistler is an old, cynical curmudgeon. The first thing that he really says, other than his kind of tertiary introductions and stuff like that, is he tells Blade that he should have killed Karen.
Right.
That's one of the first things that he says, and I believe he's later talking to Karen, and she's obviously down because she doesn't know what's happening and everything, and she is having this moment, and he just says, go buy a gun, just in case. Implying, of course, that, she should kill herself if it gets anywhere near bad. What are your thoughts overall on the character of Whistler?
I think he's a kind of, like you say. I mean, he's a cynical old git, and he just sort of says it how it is. But he's also a kind of you do get, as soon as Blade gets back to, I guess, the base with Karen. And he's sort of like, oh, you brought back a stray. Like, why didn't you, what are you doing? And it has an undertone of being protective. But also, I think Whistler kind of knew, I guess Whistler's more of the emotional side of Blade, but at the same time, he's also the kind of stern, father figure. And but still, he just kind of like, yeah, okay, you do your thing, and I don't really give a shit, kind of in that way as well. So I like him. Yeah.
Okay. I really think that they did a good job of setting up their hideout too. The hideout felt run down. It felt, hidden away in the dirty industrial part of the city. Which, an interesting fact, most people don't know that this actually takes place in New Orleans. A lot of people have always said it looks like Detroit and it looks like parts of New York or New Jersey, but it is actually supposed to be New Orleans, which is where most of the Blade comics take place in the beginning. But they give it personality because it has shrines, it has all this equipment that looks used. The place itself looks very lived in with all the cracks and the flickering lighting and everything. It even has a plant in one particular part that becomes kind of part of his ritual later. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. In the end, I love this introduction we get into Blade's life. Like what he's been doing, how he lives, his relationship with Whistler and all that. And juxtaposed to that is, of course, the first scene that we get with the Vampire Council. And this is interesting to me because this lets the audience know that there's more to the vampire world than them just being crazed, bloodthirsty beasts or just killers or anything like that. There's a structure, there's an arc, kind of a setup there with this ruling class that thinks they're better because they were born vampires. What did you think? Did that actually add? Did it make you more interested into the politics of the vampires or anything like that, or was it just tacked on?
I think in this case it was. I mean, if you look at sort of other films now, there tends to be. You got like your kind of covens, and people keep to themselves. They keep to themselves, but you also have like an order, and there's a hierarchy. I don't think that in this, for some reason, it didn't quite fit for me, and it was just kind of an excuse to see Frost sort of go off the rails a bit, and it I don't know. It just didn't seem. It just seemed like. And something that it just didn't fit right for me, and it really was pretty pointless. Or at least that the scenes in the sort of at the table with all these purebloods, which is another thing that isn't explained, and I never understood. I don't know whether it's explained in the comics or not, but how can you be a pureblood? I don't get it. Like, how can you be born? I mean, is it basically like? But I don't know. I never understood that.
Without going into too much explanation, there's there are ways that like vampires have children, with mortals.
I guess.
Yeah, and it's not. The reason it's not explained in the movies is honestly because it's not that interesting and it doesn't really add anything. So I think I just accidentally agreed with your point, even though I was getting ready to actually say that I don't like mindless killers. I don't like enemies that are just there to destroy. I like my enemies to have some goals, some motivation, some reasons that they fight. And so I thought it was better that they added in this little bit of an element to show that, they do think and they do have their own political system, and that there's a reason they're trying to fight each other and Blade to get one up. But I'm seeing your point a little bit more than that, so I guess that's harder to argue now.
Yeah, no, but I can also see your point as there does need to be some kind of maintenance, because as you say, they're not necessarily all mindless or anything. There is an aim and a purpose to keep numbers, but also keep under wraps and make sure and then it sort of goes on to I start talking about like stock market or something like that would be mundane and quite dull, considering who they are and what they're actually capable of. But the fact that there is obviously a need for some kind of structure, as you say, I can understand it, and I guess that's probably the reason why it didn't need to be any longer than a few minutes. And I suppose it does show the sort of contrasting characteristics between, Frost and, the Order, if you like, or, whatever you want to call them. So I can also see your point as well in that respect.
So, along with this, they do the same thing on Blade's side. They incorporate, when he's explaining to Karen about the kind of the vampire lore and how he deals with vampires and stuff like that, they put it in the dialogue, which feels like it could have just been silly exposition that fans already knew, but they did it with kind of his flair, because he says something to the effect of like, you aim for the head or the heart. Anything else is your ass.
Right.
It sounds like something Blade might actually say, so it doesn't
Right.
feel as forced. And Whistler even mentions that there are others out there like them. Like, I don't know if they intentionally were always planning on bringing in the Night Stalkers, which are big in the comics, and they come in the third movie. I don't know if that was their intent, but it made it feel like, hey, this isn't just Blade and his fight. There's this whole conflict that's bigger than just this, but this is where the crux is right now.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I remember seeing one of the sort of special features or the commentary about how they didn't want to discuss sequels because, it was kind of like almost would be jinxing it because they didn't know how well the first one would go. So they tried to sort of avoid the subject of a sequel. But as you say, just a simple one line can open up, a whole can of worms, really, for anybody, especially like theorists and stuff as well, who want more. So perhaps it could have been a bit of a teaser without that intention. I don't know.
Are you one of those people in your favorite movie series, if you see something later in the series or in a TV show and you go back and you rewatch an episode or the first movie and they make just even the slightest bit nod, do you start looking into it to see if maybe that's what they were intending the whole time?
Maybe sometimes I might be one of those people that goes back if I have time and watch with commentary from like the director or actors and see their points of view and what they thought about each scene or line or whatever. Yeah, I might do that.
So that's a yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Blade for a second, because one of the things that I thought was really cool with his character is that Blade's not your standard straight up hero, and we kind of alluded to this earlier. He's an anti-hero. Let's just be honest. I love that he uses Karen as bait. He follows her back to her apartment, and she has the whole paranoia when she's in the elevator because he talked to her about the ghouls, and we have these familiars that are running around.
Yeah.
And it leads to one of the best lines where he knocks out the cop, who is the familiar, and then he checks his watch and says it's a fake, and he throws it away.
Yeah.
And she looks at him, and I forget what she says, but he's basically like, how do you think we fund this operation? And it's just it's like, well, how do you argue that? Of course, right?
Yeah, that's right, because she says, what, are you going to rob him now? Are you going to rob me too? And he's like, and that's when he says, how do you think we fund this? And of course you see when he goes to get his serum, that he hands over a bag which is obviously jewelry and stuff that's been stolen.
Right.
So
yeah. When we see the scene in Frost's loft, Frost is there. He's having like a small get together with obviously several other vampires and stuff like that.
Yeah.
He has this really interesting loft with like a pool with rubber duckies in it.
Yeah,
I don't really. Maybe I'm just not seeing the appeal. I don't know. But in this scene, we first see Blade's mother getting out of the bed. Now, I didn't realize at first that was who that was. Did you?
No, I didn't either. Because you don't really, you don't see her full face either. Because when the bed, the lid lifts as she's sort of getting up, the camera is slightly out of focus, and I think they did that on purpose to maybe indicate that it could be, because initially I thought it was just some other vampire woman that he has. He's obviously got Mercury, which I initially thought was his, right-hand woman, his girl. And then you've got this, this other female that gets out of, his bed, and, and she's, and again, the camera doesn't pan up to see her face in shot. While he's at his desk, looking at the archives being translated. So, yeah, I had no clue at that point, even then, that she was that's who it was.
Yeah. So it's again adding a certain element. It's adding a thing, a little bit more story and stuff like that. But I think that actually worked because I think most of the audience were kind of like, oh, well, that might be her, but who is this? So,
yeah, it gave that kind of mystery, that kind of shroud of again, open to theory and discussion. But it's funny you should actually mention that scene as well, because I did notice, after recently watching all three again, I did notice that there's a guy, I think he's on the sofa near Quinn.
And he's in the second movie
he's one of
the blood pack.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But he's a different vampire obviously in the first one, but he's uncredited, he's not known.
Yeah.
You don't
whoever the actor is that plays Chupa is Vince from all the Fast and the Furious movies.
Yes.
He's one of the bad guys from the first Transporter movie. He's been in a lot of little things and stuff that's kind of noticeable. And I didn't notice until this time watching it, just like you said, that he's in the first movie. I guess they liked him so much, they're like, do you want to come back and be another vampire?
Yeah, exactly. Kind of almost typecast, if you like. Because he does, as you say, he plays little roles like that, where he's usually the kind of douchebag that, you know, is kind of on the border of, playing like a sort of a good guy-ish, but not really. And, just being a complete and a twat, basically.
Right. We have these really cool scenes that are all mixed in that 10 to 15 minute period. You get the dingy club with the girls singing. You get Pearl with its even kind of a creepier subsection, that is showing a different side of the vampire society. You have Deacon Frost's loft, which is rich and exquisite, and he's having this party, and he kills the cop at the end of that scene, just bites him and throws him in the pool. There's these really cool kind of they're almost kind of like showing these different aspects of the world. And what concludes that is we get Whistler's backstory, which is kind of neat and adds not only to his character, but it gives this reason for why people who aren't Blade, people who don't have these powers, would try to fight against these vampires. And I thought this was all really good, but something always bothers me when I watch that segment. You mentioned liking the song with the two Japanese schoolgirls singing. What? There's all these businessmen, vampires, let's assume, just watching them. No expressions. They all look so just uninterested and bored. And they're just looking at these girls dancing. Like, what kind of club is this? What am I looking at?
I don't know, because it's a complete contrast to, the first scene, or like the first in, the rave, the bloodbath. So it's, I'm guessing it looks mostly like Japanese orientated, which I always got confused as well, because there's a chef there cooking, and I'm like, but do they eat? Or is that just like a kind of a guise, or what? What sort of club is this exactly? But, and it's not like the Japanese, it's not like there's pole dancers or anything, and, the Japanese girls are Japanese girls, so what can you say? So, I guess in that way it doesn't make sense either. I don't know.
I just wondered if it made more sense to you than it did me. I thought you might have some different insights on that.
No, I think it's still, it fits in to the feel of the whole film to me. Again, kind of the undergroundy type, this is a dingy sort of men's club kind of thing, and it's where, high class businessmen go. But, other than that, I'd never really thought of it like that.
Right. So I want to talk about a couple scenes that people. This is the point where the movie kind of goes off the rails for the people who don't like it, and that's because you have the scene where Deacon Frost starts explaining his plans, and they take the Elder out and make him meet the sunrise, and they're all somehow able to withstand the sun wearing sunscreen and biker helmets.
Right.
Which, I'll admit, as much as I love this movie, I don't know if I would have gone with that. But when the Elder dies, it's a very cool looking effect for the time, and it made a point. That scene sticks out in my memory. Yeah,
and the fact that he just explodes afterwards, and it kind of, I think that particular effect and that the CGI used on that is probably the best in that film, in the first one, because when I look back at the film now, and I look at the CGI, and I look at even some of the blood, is, I look at it now and I think, yeah, that's not really aged that well.
Some of it, yeah, I agree. The actual destruction effects, I think, are fine, but some of the blood, especially, I don't know if you know, but Deacon Frost at the end, when he becomes La Magra, was originally actually supposed to be much bigger and kind of this swirling, cloudy
like
mist.
a hurricane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they just said they just couldn't do it. They didn't have the time, they didn't have the ability, and, you know, I'm glad they stuck with something a little simpler. If they realizing that you can't do something in a film sometimes is more valuable than trying to do it and failing, you know?
Right. Yeah, definitely, I agree. And that funny you should mention that, because even the blood are dripping on top of the sort of the elders' heads. And you see it from the sort of perspective as if you were standing underneath that, and then you see it drip, and even then you can tell it's computer generated, which I don't mind too much, but little things like that do kind of annoy me.
Well, they could have used practical blood, but you wouldn't have had that neat shot of the camera following the blood as it fell down. But I wonder which would have been better, which would have held up better.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would have been, because I mean afterwards, I don't know, once it's on their head, whether that would switch to practical or not. I mean, I assume it did, but maybe it didn't. I don't know. So yeah, that's a question, but that's just one like sort of niggly little thing that I picked up on, and it's not important. It's not like detriment to the whole film. It doesn't change my opinion. It's just the way I am with between practical effects versus CG.
I promise it's not just you. So we have the park scene where, of course, was the famous line, and that was the big scene that they showed in the trailer, because right before The Matrix came out, you had this very cool-looking scene of Deacon Frost dodging these very interesting, cool-looking bullets that come out of Blade's gun, and the line from Blade about your mascara running and all that. I always thought that was a fun scene, and that was one of the main scenes in the trailer, and I think that was one of the scenes that maybe sold me on the movie.
It is quite a fun scene, sort of the fact that you're seeing the main, the protagonist and the antagonist, sort of head to head during the day. So you're thinking, hang on, what's going on here?
Right.
The sort of the altercation between the two. The whole like sunblock during the, I kind of thought, really?
It may be better if we just don't question that.
Yeah, it probably is, because I could probably go on about that thinking, what? But, yeah.
I agree. One of the things that I can go on about and thinking, what were they doing? But we can discuss this, of course, was not long after this is when Blade finds Whistler dead. And he is becoming, he doesn't find him dead. He's becoming a vampire, I believe. And he gives, Whistler asks for the gun, and Blade gives him the gun, and it's actually not the most overdramatic moment in the trilogy, and it's probably one of the scenes that work out best when he's just like, walk away, you son of a bitch,
Yeah.
And I don't know, it was a really good scene, and it made you really want Blade to go kill Deacon Frost. And I know that the original intention, apparently, like you said, they didn't want to bank on having a sequel, but the original intention was that Whistler didn't die. That, according to the writer and the director, they always knew that Whistler hadn't died there. But I think it would have been much better had he actually just died.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's like when, when the second one came along and then you got the third as well, and I'm thinking, really? I mean, why couldn't you just sort of... This is where kind of, I guess, I thought that Marvel... Well, not so much Marvel, but perhaps like the writers and such...
Right.
Where they kind of faltered a bit, because, you've got DC, and you've got sad stories, and like, you know, Peter Parker and obviously Uncle Ben and, you know, Batman and his parents and that kind of thing. So they should have, as you say, they should have left him for dead, and that's it. You know, not gone back to it, because that would have made, I think that would have given the audience a bit more backing for Blade, I guess, and his character, and, you know, it's like, oh, well, he goes through a lot of shit, you know, and yeah, so I think they should have left it there as well. Right. I completely agree.
And it's just really weird because, not to jump ahead, but they make him a part of 2, which is fine. That wasn't as bad. I didn't hate that as much as I thought I was going to. But then in 3, they just kill him again.
Right. Yeah, and it's just kind of like, well,
didn't that just feel what the point? And he didn't even die. You know, it wasn't like he died killing off a major threat. He didn't die defending, you know, a bus full of school children or anything. He died in an FBI raid, and it just felt so awkward. It felt so awkward. Yeah,
it was just thrown in there just as an excuse to introduce a different character in his place, and it was just so haphazard and last minute thought. That was annoying, and I really didn't care at that point. You know, as great as a character as Whistler is, you know, second one, like you say, it wasn't too bad. Okay, but you know, maybe they could have just left it there.
Yeah. So this leads us all to the end of the first movie, really, where you have the temple, we have the summoning of La Magra, and a couple of really cool things happen here. One, Quinn wins for the cheesiest, best line, which is, "I'm going to be a naughty vampire god." Just when he says that, for some reason, he makes that line work, and it shouldn't. And it's weird seeing this guy, because this is the guy. I don't know if you watch Gotham, which is a DC show, but he's Bullock on Gotham.
He's Bullock. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. He's also he was in Vikings as well.
I did not know that. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. It was only like for maybe one season, but yeah.
Right. And then we have Karen thrown into the pit where she meets an old friend, and I did not realize the first time that I saw this movie that was Curtis.
Ah, right. No, I knew who it was, and it actually, seeing him, that's probably the most scariest part. Like, if I was ever going to be scared by this film, which I wasn't, because I have quite a high tolerance. The reason why he scared me so much, because he's a decomposing vampire, unfortunately, you know, it kind of buggered up for him. And the reason why he scared me so much was because of his makeup. Reminded me a lot. Oh, it was bloody brilliant, and he reminded me of you know, the sort of in the Evil Dead, that kind of makeup.
Oh yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, and the reason why it scared me so much was because it brings back memories from when I was younger, and I watched that film. I started to watch it when I shouldn't have. And not knowing what was happening or what was going to happen, and let's just say I was scarred for life on that one. I've seen it since, but you know, when I was young, too young to watch it, that scared the crap out of me, and I had nightmares for years. So
I can see that. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so it brought back some painful memories, I guess.
Okay.
When I saw him.
But she escapes, and this leads up to a scene that I want to talk about. Every Blade movie, Blade has to get captured or needs rescuing from someone.
Yes.
And I know why, or I have an idea why. Gore is a writer first, and I think that he understands that if you have a character like Riddick from the Chronicles of Riddick, who is just infallible, who just never needs anyone's help, he's just such a badass, and he's never in real danger, then no one's going to sympathize with him. So Blade has to look like, even though you know he's not going to die, he has to look like he could die. He has to have this possibility. He has to have these moments of weakness to make you want to root for him and to make you be concerned about his well-being, right? Right,
exactly, yeah.
But it's weird that they do, like, they have to have this one scene. I believe every each of these films has a one scene, yes, because I can remember all three of them right now, where he is on a table or trapped somehow, and he's lost all of his blood. So, but it leads to two of probably the most vampires were always associated a lot with sexual nature, and this is the scene where he's feeding on Karen. It's a very sexual, very rejuvenating scene. He uses his serum, and this is the first time it looks like that he's had real blood in years. And it's this really well shot scene in that chamber room where he was held up. But then you have right after that a very different type of sexual tension, but it's between him and his mother, and it's about him letting go of this idea. This whole plot between him and his mother, I'm sitting here wondering if it was really needed, but this scene kind of wraps it all together and makes it where he grows just a tad bit as a character. What did you think about that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree, because it almost is. It's almost like he, you know, for a brief moment, he kind of realizes what he has to do, and you know, feeding off of Karen to regain his strength. So, as you say, you know, there's that tension as the sort of ritual is going on with Frost and, you know, La Magra and stuff, and then his mom comes in, and it kind of, you know, when she was, yeah, it was just like, it creeped me out when she sort of went up to him, and, you know, she was sort of like rubbing her nose against his chin and stuff, and I was thinking, like, well, I think that's the point where he's going to realise that this isn't the sort of the reunion he wanted. You know, that if he was going to see her again, if she did survive, that she's completely gone, and the fact that she's almost hitting on him, it's like, really?
Like I said, it's a different type of sexual tension / release with his mom, and I believe you worded that really well. So I think that's those two scenes together work to set up the final scene. The problem with the final scene, for most people that don't know this, none of what happens after this originally happened in the script, and they had a testing, and the reason this movie was delayed by half a year was because they had to go back and reshoot almost the entire ending of the movie, because the original screenings, they didn't like it. No one who saw the original screenings apparently liked it. And the sword fight with Deacon was added in at the end. There were other things, and you can tell, like, looking at this, that whole final sequence really feels a little bit, just a tad bit different than the rest of the movie.
Yeah, almost like broken up.
Yeah. Also, I will say that, going back to your point earlier about the CGI, I almost laugh every time I see the bat skeletons crawling out of the elders to do, because it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. And I know they probably thought on paper this would sound cool, but it's not, is it?
No, not at all. It is, again, out of the whole film, like, as I mentioned, the CGI, you know, out of the whole film, because, like, obviously, like the subway scene, for example, when they the subway, when they're trying to avoid the trains and stuff, that was all CG. The you know, the trains, so obviously they wouldn't use the, you know, they built the set and everything. Right. But then you've got the end. Yeah, those skeletons are just like, what? It looks like something out of a really bad early 90s, late 80s TV show.
It does look early 90s, I'll give you that.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be, you know, nearly the 2000s, obviously, like 1998 and what have you, but yeah, so other than that, you know, it was okay. When they were first coming out of the mouths and stuff, that was okay, but when they were flying around, like you say, that was just like, what, really?
Right.
But one thing that I never understood, and it wasn't explained until I looked at the deleted scenes, I never understood, and this doesn't just go for Blade, but this goes for quite a few other sort of films or TVs, you know, TV series. When vampires want to basically make everyone in the whole world, like, it just basically eradicate humans altogether and just have vampires. And I always thought, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to eliminate your source of food?
Yeah.
I never understood that plot. Never understood it.
So it's really interesting that you say this, because apparently there was an actual scene that was cut out of the script.
Correct.
Where they actually talk about the blood bags. And I'm sure you know where I'm going with this, where they use that scene for part 3 later.
Yes,
so,
exactly. Yeah, I was going to say that.
I'm glad we both did our research. Okay.
Yeah, I did a little bit.
Yeah. So that is an interesting thing, and I'll admit, sometimes you hear it and you're like, okay, I guess I see why you're doing this, and I see that you're preparing a little bit, but that just sounds unnecessarily complicated.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. It's like, why would you do that? You know,
Right.
well, what's wrong with the setup you have now? But yeah, that's just it. That was the only thing that annoyed me with Frost's character, is because I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Deacon Frost's character in the comics, he's actually an old guy, isn't he? With like white hair.
He has like silver hair, and you know.
Yeah, he's depicted completely differently, and I suppose perhaps, you know, the casting choice. I mean, Stephen Dorff was awesome. Like,
he did a great job.
Yeah, and again, you could tell he had fun with this character, and he really like got into it. But I guess they sort of picked a younger character to sort of communicate with younger audiences, I suppose.
Sure.
And again, to kind of you know, to be hip with the kids. I don't know.
Is that what you think they were going for?
Yeah, I think they were going, yeah, you know what, we don't want these kind of like old geezers as bad guys. We want the young, and you know, someone who's on their level, that gets these kids and sit and listen to, you know, grunge music in the corner and writing poetry and stuff.
But that is one of the things that you can do with vampires, is you can have a villain of any age, because the idea behind vampires is they don't age, and they could have been embraced, or you know, they can stop aging at any point. And I guess I'm okay with that. I don't really mind. I mean, having the older villain would have been cool, but you know, having Deacon Frost there, I don't think it's an issue.
Yeah, no, it's not an issue at all. I just think that with, you know, his whole kind of, you know, going against like the purebloods and trying to summon a blood god, it kind of made me think of his character as a bit of a throwing his toys out of his pram and spitting his dummy out. You know, he's you know, he's young, and he's relatively young, you know, in comparison to when he was turned or what have you. I mean, I don't know how old he actually is, but I don't reckon he's that young, that old rather.
No, you're right.
And yeah, so it just kind of made me think of like a grumpy teen a little bit.
He is the archetype of the petulant prince. He has all he could ever want. He's rich. He has that loft. He's got these followers, but for some reason, it's not enough. Exactly,
and I think, you know, and it mentions the when he first goes into the what's it called?
The library.
With the elders. Yeah,
the council
well,
chambers
that
or
too.
whatever. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, thank you. And, you know, he's just sitting there, and he's like legs up, and he's just smoking a cigarette and what have you, and he's just, and you know, they're saying, look, you know, these parties are dangerous. You're exposing us too much. We've got a good deal going on here. And it almost reminded me of Lestat as well. Lestat's character.
I can totally see the comparisons to that, sure.
In the sense that, you know, he's just bored, he wants a bit of a challenge, and, you know, yeah, Blade's a problem, but he's just sort of quite arrogant in that, you know, in that sense.
Right. No, those are some good thoughts and comparisons on that. I do want to, just to finish up with the ending here, I do want to say that I think the final fight scene works, except for the CGI. And I like that they introduce this blue liquid that Karen made to help him kill vampires. And of course, Deacon Frost has studied Blade, but he doesn't know Karen, and so therefore he assumes incorrectly and thinks that that's his serum. So it sets it up later for the big ending. Mm-hmm. Which the effect of when he uses it on the two Asian vampires in Frost's loft was actually sickening and very cool at the same time.
Yeah, and again, it reminded me of a cross between Akira and Big Trouble in Little China.
I can see that a lot.
Yeah.
Also, one of the other cool effects, the fighting happens so quick at the end when he's taking on the minions right before Frost. I never realized until about my third viewing of the film that Blade actually rips the throat out of one of them and throws the piece of the throat at the next guy.
Right, yes, yeah, and then I think I know which bit you're on about now. Yeah, I did clock that something happened. Like, I think it happened a bit too quick for me to realise at the time. But now that you mention it, I know what you're on about. Yeah.
Right. So, in the end, of course, good triumphs, right? And one of my favorite lines from any movie is said, which is some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
Ice skate uphill.
I don't know why I love that line so much, but it just seems like a very adequate quote for right then, and it just worked. And again, as we talked about, we talked about Snipes playing it, but Snipes originally, when he went to pitch a film with Marvel, he wasn't trying to play Blade. He was trying to play Black Panther.
Black Panther. Yeah.
And Marvel and I believe Gore were more interested in working on a different project, and it ended up becoming Blade. Same thing originally, like directors like David Fincher were supposed to direct this movie, which Fincher's an amazing director, so that would have been very interesting, but I'm not sure exactly how that would have gone. But did you know who else they actually tried to get before Snipes fully agreed to it to actually play Blade?
I think it was the usual suspects like Denzel, I want to say Cuba Gooding Jr., but I don't think so. I don't
know about that one. It was Denzel is correct. Denzel is correct. Lawrence Fishburne, which I actually remember hearing that. Like, I remember being younger and hearing about that because I used to read like Wizard magazine and all that stuff that they would talk about things like that. But the one that threw me is that at one point they apparently were in discussion with LL Cool J to play Blade.
That was it. Yeah. That was the third one. Yeah. I think I'm kind of glad it didn't go in those directions, and I'm glad that Snipes took it. Right. To be honest, I don't think that the role could have gone to a better person.
No, I agree. And I don't know if you know this, but do you know that there was one part in the script that they actually had to cut out because Marvel wasn't very comfortable with it? And we talked about him being the anti-hero. Are you aware of the part that they cut out?
I think I do. You'll have to refresh my memory, but I think I do.
So originally in the script, Whistler and Blade, to test all their new weapons, kept a vampire fetus in like a jar that they would test the weapons against to see if it would hurt it. And I kind of, the more I think about that now, I can see why they decided that they didn't want that part in the script.
Right. Yeah.
But it shows how bleak the world that they live in is, and it shows the lengths, I guess, that they're willing to go to. But it would have kind of taken away a little bit from showing that Blade does have a soft side,
Mhm. Yeah, I think so, and I think they gave a good balance for him. Showing the sort of ever so slightly soft and perhaps vulnerable, I guess, to the just complete badass and jokey one-liner quip anti-hero type guy. So yeah, I think they did a good job balancing him out.
Right. So if anyone out there listening likes what you had to say about Blade or wants to hear your thoughts on other vampire movies or anything like that, where can people find you? So
I have a Twitter, which I will always say hi to and whatever. So just, drop me a tweet. And that is at Geeketiquette YT.
Okay, and I understand also you produce some videos. I'm guessing that's what that YT at the end is for.
Yeah, it is. It's short for YouTube, and like many channels out there, I do predominantly retro gaming. But I have a complete mix of all kinds of stuff. But yeah, I do gaming, and it's just Geek Etiquette, or I think the shortcut is actually youtube.com/c/Geek Etiquette game.
Okay, very good. Well, I want to thank you for your time, for coming out and talking with me about Blade and letting me record this and share it with everybody. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all. It's been a blast.
All right, and for all of you out there listening, I want to thank you for hearing what we had to say about something that I consider, at least one of my favorite films of all time. So thank you, and until next time, you guys take care.